It's an inconvenient truth for doomsday scientists and lockdown fanatics that Omicron has turned out to be a pussycat. So why did we expect it to be so horrific, given the signs from South Africa were always promising? Well, because of the junk modelling used by Sage to try and convince Boris to lock down the country again at Christmas. Newly released deaths data from the Office for National Statistics looking at January shows actual deaths were around 93% lower than the Sage forecast for what would happen if Boris didn't introduce more restrictions. Warwick University Sage modelling predicted 2,890 deaths per day as a central estimate, where the reality was under 200 deaths a day. So how are they getting away with these dangerously wrong projections? Well, someone who's leading the charge against bogus modelling and shining a light on the truth is former head of health statistics at the Office for National Statistics, Jenkins. Stats Jamie. And he joins me now. Jamie, look, it's shocking, isn't it, just how badly wrong Sage got it and just how close we came to being locked down completely unnecessarily. Why do you think they got it so wrong, and what have you picked up while you've been investigating these stats?
Yeah, evening, Dan. I think just before we have this model, actually, we did have Sage talking back in September of last year, because remember, I think Wales and Scotland were looking at what Boris brought in as Plan B in the end. And last September, Sage models has again come out and said that if Boris didn't bring in Plan B, which was the vaccine passes, the working from home last September, that we would get between 3,000 to 7,000 hospitalisations a day. He didn't go with Plan B at that point, and we didn't get above 900. So they were kind of showing the unpromise of good work there, I suppose, because they were failing. And then we went into Christmas, and obviously Boris and Parliament backed bringing in Plan B. But then the Sage modelers, and this is the Warwick University model that you just put up, did a range of different models. So this one that we're talking about tonight is where they assumed that Omicron would be 50% less deadly, that we get a huge booster drive, which is what we did. And they came up with this 2,890 a day. And the upper estimate was closer to 5,000 and the lower estimate just under 2,000. Now, Neil Ferguson as well came up with a separate prediction. I heard him, I think, on the BBC saying potentially 5,000 deaths a day. And I did write there, Dan, before Christmas, just breaking those numbers down. They were just laughable when they were talking about them, because obviously you don't just get deaths, you've got to get the cases for people to sadly die. And to get anywhere near, say, 5,000 deaths a day, you would need around 1.7 million cases a day. And that's just the ones you identify. And then, of course, not everybody gets tested. So you probably need over 3 million people a day being infected. And we got nowhere near that. And it was just laughable when you look at it. And now, because Boris decided not to go and bring in the extra restrictions beyond Plan B, it's a good opportunity now to mark kind of the homework, because this is what they said would happen. And the ONS figures, which are probably the gold standard in terms of looking at deaths, because they're not just deaths where people had a positive test, they're deaths where it's been mentioned on the death certificate, and they're lower than 200. So, the big problem, Dan, if we have another kind of variant that becomes more deadly, is less unlikely because of the way previous pandemics work. But if we did, who's going to believe any of the modelling?
Well, indeed. But, Jamie, I think you're so right to point out, thank goodness we can mark the homework, because, of course, if Boris Johnson had listened to the likes of Whitty and Gove, we would have locked down and they would have said, oh, see, this is why there's been so few deaths, because we locked down. Now, you've been looking at the stats throughout this pandemic. Do you agree with a growing academic body that actually says the lockdowns did far less than were ever promised? I mean, the Johns Hopkins University analysis, for example, saying they may have reduced deaths by just 0.2%.
Yeah, well, I think, Dan, now we've come through kind of 2 years on, it's quite clear that the main benefit of a lockdown is where people would get infected, can't get the hospital care. And that's really the only rationale for locking down, because, I've said this in the past, all it does is if you lock the country down, it pauses the spread of the virus. So it just kicks the can down the road a little bit, and people will still get infected. You can see that we've had lockdowns, people have opened up, and then infections have gone back up. What's interesting here now, and similar in other countries as well, where they haven't brought in strict lockdowns, we've just seen kind of what the virus probably does. It goes up, and then it starts coming back down again, and in particular on the winter months that we've seen here. So, I think when we look back to last March, maybe we needed something, but all the lockdowns afterwards, I think we've learned lessons now for the future.
Jamie, just a very quick word on this whole issue of the unvaccinated versus the vaccinated and hospital numbers, because I know you have picked up on it before when guests come on my show and other shows and make these claims. What's the truth? Are most people in hospital vaccinated or unvaccinated?
So it depends where we're looking at. So the latest data actually, Dan, shows that in the 4 weeks of the latest information from the UK Health Agency, if we're looking at adults, it's about 18.5% of the admissions are unvaccinated. So the vast majority of people are vaccinated who are going into hospital. But remember, the vast majority of people are vaccinated. I think what Omicron has done, as you say, is a bit of a pussycat. The vast majority of people in hospitals now are in with COVID, but not specifically because of it. And we've seen the number of patients in critical care coming down. And ironically, Dan, through this winter, we've had no more patients in critical care overall, regardless of the reason, than we had in 3 of the 4 winters before the pandemic. So I think the data is clearly showing now that it's time to kind of move on. It's not as bad as what it was this time last year.
And thank God we didn't look down. We'll keep up your great work crunching the numbers, stats. Jamie Jenkins, such a pleasure to have you.